I don't know if you've noticed, but this is a challenging time for state and local officials. We're having to rapidly embrace a 24/7 digital world in the midst of a pandemic. Luckily, iConstituent.com is on a mission to help digitize services with the first platform designed specifically for the elected official to manage one-to-one personal engagement. See for yourself how their texting outreach tools are making positive impacts during the pandemic, from the city of Los Angeles to the halls of the U.S. Congress. They allow leaders to leverage data sets of constituent phone numbers to share updates on COVID and assist constituents with breaking through the red tape to get the help they need. Visit iConstituent.com to access recent case studies and get started with 5,000 text messages at no cost. Again, that's iConstituent.com. Welcome to An Honorable Profession, a podcast giving America hope since 2018. I'm your host, Ryan Coonerty. I'm proud to say that we're closing in on both our second anniversary and our 50th episode. The New Deal and I are grateful to have shared some amazing leaders with you during that time. From Mayor Pete, when he was just a mayor, to rising stars in the Democratic Party like Senator Ramesh Akbari, Boise Mayor Lauren McLean, and Wisconsin Lieutenant Governor Mandela Barnes. I believe that these leaders deserve a national stage. I hope you will help them, and me, by telling a friend about An Honorable Profession and rate us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. And guess what? We're now on Instagram. Follow us at #AnHonorableProfession.
Welcome to An Honorable Profession. I'm Debbie Cox Bultan, CEO of the New Deal, where we're proud to support so many of the leaders you hear on this podcast. Today I'm filling in for our regular host, Santa Cruz Supervisor Ryan Coonerty, an inspiring public servant in his own right, as he deals with the major wildfires in his area. Our hearts are with him, his family, and his community. In this episode, I was honored to speak with Mayor Anna Tovar of Tolleson, Arizona. She shared her inspiring story of turning a life-threatening personal experience into life-saving work as an elected official representing her hometown. We talked about her incredible journey from school teacher to the State House and City Hall, and her current run for statewide office. We discussed governing in these extraordinary times, the changing political landscape of Arizona, and the value of electing more women to serve. I am so inspired by this woman, and I know you will be too. So Anna Tovar, welcome to An Honorable Profession.
Thank you. Thank you, Debbie. Thank you for having me.
Of course. So here's what I want to ask you to start. There's just so much going on in our country right now, and mayors are really, across the country, they're on the front lines. You know, that's the pandemic, the recession, the fight for racial justice. You know, you're governing in really unprecedented times. So I just want to ask you a real broad question to start. You know, what is it like to be a mayor right now? And is it different than what you expected when you were elected in 2016?
Wow, that is a great question, Debbie, because definitely it is not what I expected when I was elected and sworn in 2016. I had the honor of serving and being the first female here in the city of Tolleson in its 90-year history. So it was just great coming into this position. But, you know, when the pandemic hit, it was definitely fast and furious in regards to action on my behalf, because I knew it was crucial. And I'm very thankful for New Deal in providing me that guidance, the talks that we have, the webinars, the Zoom meetings, and, you know, sharing with my sisters, mayors here in Arizona. It really was able to hit the ground running, and making sure I was doing everything possible as a mayor. But as you said, we're in the front lines. It is tumultuous times, especially when you get those phone calls from constituencies, because you know that, you know, local government is the closest to its constituency. And, you know, I have people that are calling me, texting me, neighbors that are requesting, you know, just questions. And those are hard conversations, especially when, you know, you have a neighbor, a constituent that lost their life, that has lost their job, that has a child that is sick with COVID. We get those calls as mayors day in and day out, unlike, governors who are not getting those very tough calls and are able to distance themselves from this pandemic, where we receive it as mayors day in and day out, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Yeah, and let me ask you about COVID and how things are going. I know that Arizona was a real hot spot during the summer, and communities of color across the country were hit particularly hard. And it feels like that was true with Tolleson as well. You have about, I think, 7,000 people in your town, mostly Latino, many essential workers. So how are things going right now? Have things gotten any better for you?
Well, as you mentioned, here in Arizona, we hit a surge with cases because the governor acted very slowly to close our state down, and actually acted very quickly to reopen it without any science and data backing up those, to reopen as he did. So my city, I closed my city 2 weeks before the governor took action. And then once he started taking action, he actually stripped our jurisdiction from us and making any changes that deviated from his executive orders. So that put us in a bad predicament where we weren't able to control our own destiny of our own city in regards to a pandemic. So that was very frustrating. And I would say that's what caused the surge for us to see those spikes, especially in communities of color like mine, where we're 90% Latino. Just short of a month ago, the county health department declared us a hot spot. We were 2.5 times higher in our diagnosis than Maricopa County. So it was a troublesome statistic to see that, I had been asking for numbers, data for about 4 months. And it wasn't until I was, till we hit a hot spot that the county health department notified us and gave me the numbers that I'd been asking for months. So there isn't a playbook, and, there isn't that national cohesiveness, the national plan that we're all seeking, let alone a Arizona plan from our governor. Sadly, I haven't even spoken to my governor in regards to COVID throughout this entire pandemic, because there is, very little communication with his office and with mayors as well, too.
That's hard to hear. But I will say, I think you did have one thing when you were dealing with a lot of these issues, and you mentioned this in the top, your sister mayors. You have a real powerhouse of other female mayors around you, from your fellow New Deal leader, Kate Gallego in Phoenix, Regina Romero in Tucson, and Coral Evans in Flagstaff. And I know that a lot of you, that you came together on a lot of these issues. I saw a lot of you on TV nationally talking about the mask mandates, talking about the need for more resources for testing. How great has it been to have that kind of solidarity with other female mayors in Arizona to work together? Oh,
it's definitely been a blessing to have the friendship and just our collaboration, because we truly care about, just doing things properly, scientifically and factual based, that we know has been proven to slow the spread of COVID-19. So we've established the relationship, before COVID hit, which, worked out great. And we're always texting, calling one another as well, too. I really admire all my sister mayors and our courage in regards to holding the governor accountable, holding our president accountable, and really demanding that we're on the front lines. We are seeing things every single day. We need the resources, because ultimately we can't do it alone. We're trying our best, but, we're doing what we can with the resources that we have. But imagine what we can do if we were, collaborating together, unifying as one state in trying to tackle this issue. And so I also credit our New Deal as well, too, in regards to trying to bring us together, having solutions that are working across the country so that we don't have to reinvent the wheel as mayors as well, too. That has been truly helpful as well.
Yeah, that's great. I'd like to talk a little about how you got into public service to begin with. I think, as you noted, you grew up in Tolleson, where you're now mayor. You were the granddaughter of Mexican immigrants and migrant farmers, and I think you worked in your family's grocery store before leaving for college. I'd love to hear about that experience and what being in a community institution like a grocery store would have taught you about community.
Yes. I had a very unique upbringing, which when I was so small, I thought everybody grew up in a small grocery store as well, too, until I went to kinder and my kindergarten teacher busted my bubble on that. So when I was 3 days old until I was 33 years old, our family owned and operated a small grocery store here in the city of Tolleson. So I grew up in the store. I mean, these were, 8 to 10 hour days every single day of my life, with my family, my grandparents and my uncle. So really instilled the value, of how to, number one, treat others, but number two, servicing one's community. I can remember very clearly, my grandparents telling me, we didn't open the store to make millions of dollars. We opened the store because we wanted to help others in our community. And they, grew up as migrant farm workers and knew what it meant to struggle, but came to the United States for a better life for their kids and for future generations. And so I feel that I was, blessed with this type of upbringing because not only did I know everything about how to run a store and a small business at a very young age, I got to know our customers. And I got to know what they liked, what they didn't like, what was happening in their families, the trials, the tribulations, the highs and lows of a family, and being able to help our families that needed it at their moment of need. There was many times that my grandparents, my grandfather in particular, would pull a person aside because he knew they were going through a tough time. Back then there were raids that would actually, come down the street, and when the migrant film workers would come into our store, there would be a migrant bust there, and the immigration would be pulling, families apart that were exiting the store. And that was my first visualization of what immigration can do to families. And so I learned very quickly that families were being torn apart. And so my grandfather would pull the mom or dad aside when he saw them again in our store and said, look, I know you're going through some very tough times. Take what you need, and you can pay me whenever you can. And those were just things I would see on a day in, day out basis, about how one person could actually help another person and change that trajectory of that person's life. And so I got to see every day, and it stayed with me. And, my parents, my grandparents, and my uncle, definitely told us that, there's a purpose to your life, and you got to use that to help others and never forget where you come from.
I love that so much. And I got goosebumps. And, that you really took that lesson to heart, obviously, about service. When you first started your career, you started as a teacher, right? A kindergarten and a first grade teacher. So a different kind of service. I'm curious about what made you think that running for office was something you wanted to do when you first decided to run for the city council.
Yeah, so I thought I would be a kindergartner, first grade teacher for the rest of my life. And I would have been ecstatic about it because I loved teaching. I loved the little kids. I loved being able to teach them how to read and just to know that they could be anything they wanted in the world. So that to me was a true blessing. And I applied at one school, and that school was in Tolleson, the school that taught me. And I purposely did that because of my grandmother that said, remember to give back to your community. And truly, the great years of my life were teaching. And I really thought I had everything going on in regards to teaching. And, my 2 young kids, was married, had my house. Everything was going great until cancer hit. And right before cancer hit, I was asked if I would, run for the city council. And, I was like, I'm a teacher. I have 2 kids. I don't think I have time. I'm, at that time, I think I was vice president of our teachers union, and caught the eye of just women in our community. Hey, you're making progressive changes. Why don't you try and make it on a grander scale? And my answer was like, I'm a teacher, I'm a wife, and I have 2 young kids. I don't think I'll have time. But they persisted, and thank goodness they persisted. They invited me to a council meeting, and that's where I attended. And They said just attend it and, talk to us afterwards. And after the meeting, I was convinced to run because I saw the dais and there was no one that looked like me. No one. And I was like, wow, they're making changes about, things that affect my life on a day in, day out basis living here in Tolleson. I'm just not going to be able to complain. I got to step up and run and do something. And that's how I got started on city council. I actually took on a 12-year incumbent, and I went door to door with my kids in their stroller and started just talking to people about things I wanted to see changed and things I wanted to do, a true grassroots effort. And at the end of the day on that election night, I was down by like 20 votes. But on Friday, when all the early ballots were counted, I had beat them by 12.
Wow. That's so great. And there's a lot to unpack there. You talked about a lot of important issues that I want to dive into a little deeper. First of which maybe is the decision to run when you had two small children. So I'm a working mom, you're a working mom. We know that is not an easy thing to be. So tell me about what that was like to run for office with young kids and then eventually to govern both, as a city councilwoman. And I'll come back to the cancer question because that's a really important piece I know of your story. But eventually you'll get to the state legislature. So, and you were legislating with young children. So what was that like to both govern and campaign with those small boys?
Well, it was a challenge. I'm not going to lie. It was, but I think once I decided to run, and I had the support of my husband and my family, and they were just like, look, we need your voice up there. You need to do it and we'll support you. And so I had that help from my family, from my husband, with our children. And I think it was looking back on it now because they're in, early 20s right now, my boys, and they don't know anything different than their mom being in public service, whether it's at the city council level, the state level, or as mayor. They know me as, just mom, but they've experienced this whole journey with me. And, I'm grateful that I was able to expose them to things that, hopefully would change their lives as well, too. And wanting either to serve in public service or, just knowing that there's great people, great organizations, and people's voices do matter. So they've seen it all. They've seen through the tumultuous times at the state legislature where, I was getting death threats during SB 1070, to the great times, as well too. But I feel that was a great experience for them to grow up in. And I wouldn't change a thing right now. And if there are women trying to decide if they're going to run or not, I would say run, and do your best because you don't need to know all the answers to everything. You just need to be passionate, want to listen, learn, and lead. And that's what I did. I just jumped on in, not knowing how to run a campaign, how to, do things. But I asked a lot of questions, took a lot of training and learned along the way and trying to help other females that are trying to get into public service right now too. But you can do it. If I were able to juggle it, there's many other women out there that can do it.
I love it. Do you think it's gotten any easier since you first ran? It's been a while. We've seen so many more women step up and run. Do you think that that's made it easier for women who are deciding to run now?
I hope so. I really think, the more women that run and the more we lead, the more that just everyday moms that can see us can be like, wow, if they can do it, I can do it. And hopefully bring that inspiration for more women to run. There was tough times, especially at the very beginning, where, being discriminated against, being a female, also being of a minority, being Mexican. I was, just felt like, especially at the state capitol, that I had to be twice as ready and prepared and knowing my facts inside and out, ready to debate. I had to be extra prepared. I experienced that discrimination on the first day I was sworn in. It was an appointment that I was selected to take at the state legislature. So I came in about 6 weeks late and I was sworn in. My family, was there, my two boys, my husband, my mom, and my family up in the gallery, which was a great day. And we went out to eat after, and I was coming back to the state capitol because I had my first Judiciary Committee hearing. And I went into the elevator, and two of the representatives that were on the floor of the opposite party, they looked at me and they said, "Oh, you must be the new secretary." And I looked back at them and I said, "Excuse me, you just saw me like 2 hours ago getting sworn in. I'm the new state representative." And one of the gentlemen, who's now since retired, said, "Well, honey, I got ties that are older than you." And I looked back and I said, "Well, it looks like you need to get some new ties, and I'll be the one to help you get some new ties."
Good for you. I mean, that is just unbelievable. And it goes back to something you said earlier, I think, about that representation and you looking at that dais at the city council and not seeing someone like you on up there. And I just think that is so important for women to see, and people of color to see people who look like them in these positions. So, thank you for stepping out early and leading on that. I do want to come back to that question about, you mentioned your cancer. You are a 2-time leukemia survivor, and I know that as a legislator in particular, you were a huge advocate to try to restore funding that had been cut by the then governor for transplant patients. Tell us just about that experience and how it shaped your life and your public outlook on public service. And also, what would you say to people who've had experiences and then want to be advocates, whether or not they're in elected office?
Oh, great question. So I really, truly feel that I was meant to be where I was at, and there was a purpose for me to be at the state legislature during this time. So you mentioned the cuts to transplants happened during the recession in 2010. And there were 99 patients in Arizona that were on this Medicaid access plan here in Arizona. From one day to the next, their lives changed for the worse, where they received a letter in the mail that said, due to the legislative cuts and, the governor approving these cuts, you're no longer eligible for a transplant. In fact, there isn't a transplant that you'll have because the funding has been cut. So those 99 patients had exhausted any other option for survival, and their transplant was their last chance of survival. So when I was at the state capitol, I found out about this story and I said, well, clearly this has to be a mistake. This could get fixed, immediately. Let's try and do that. So I focused on trying to bring about a quick solution, but found out very quickly that no one wanted to restore $1.45 million to the budget to save 99 lives. They used some incorrect data in saying that transplants weren't effective of saving people's lives. So that's when I said, okay, I'm here for a reason, and let me share my story of how 2 transplants saved my life. And so shared my story with my colleagues, then with media as well too. And then I said, okay, well, I'm going to be the person that's going to carry this water and going to be the voices for the 99 patients. And so I started contacting them and asking them to contact me. So we came up quickly with a plan where either if the patients were well enough and some weren't, where their families would come as well too and share their story to their state rep and their state senator. I then drafted 12 different types of bills to restore this funding and save their lives. I actually fundraised the $1.45 million to actually get it back into the state's budget. So I also asked for the governor to talk to me every single day, and she refused. About 6 months into this journey, the third person had passed away. And granted, I got to know a lot of these families and patients. And this last person that passed, he actually went to the same cancer clinic that I did. He was 22 years old, passed away. And that night we had a vigil at the state capitol, and I was just upset. I was like, wow, there's people dying because people's inaction. I have multiple solutions sitting right in front of you, and just frustrated at the inaction of the governor. And so that night I was on Fox News, and I said some choice words, all professional, of course, but caught the eye of the governor, where the next day their office called and said, "You're not going to stop, right?" I said, "No, I've just started the fight. So I have the solutions, and actually, you can take full credit for everything you restore. I just want these people to have a second chance at life." And so from that call, about 5 days later, transplants were reinstated. And at that time, 96 people were able to get their transplant and be back on the list. And the day that we reinstated the funding, there was a double lung transplant recipient named Tiffany Tate. And the day that we reinstated the transplants, she got a call saying that she had 2 lungs waiting for her transplant. So the timing was critical, where Tiffany Tate was able to receive her double lung transplant the very next day. And she lived for a lot of years since then. And I got a phone call a couple years ago saying that she had passed. And it was from her dad. And her dad had said, "Thank you for your fight, because I had all these extra years with my daughter. She was able to get married. She was able to coach. She was able to live a great life." And truly, I believe that I was there for a reason. I'd gone through my journey of cancer not once, but twice. And that it's just taught me so much on how to advocate for others, and especially those that have gone through similar situations. I implore you to use your experiences to be the voice for those that are struggling through that similar situation now, because your story, your experience will change and can change policy if it needs to. But we need everyone just to share their story. And it can be difficult. I mean, you could hear me. It is difficult for me because it brings back those memories, some good, some bad. But ultimately, use your experiences to help another person, to help a cause, so that people don't have to relive an experience similar to what we've gone through.
Oh, and I'm so sorry for those you lost, but it is such a powerful testament to the change you were able to bring. I'm a little teary, so but that is just an incredible story, and thank you for sharing that with us, and just a reminder of how public service can change lives, real lives, one at a time. So thank you so much for sharing that. I'd like to talk a little bit about your decision to run for mayor, to come back home and run for mayor of your hometown. And you also you are now running statewide, actually, for a Corporations Commission, which I should note for non-Arizonans is the elected Public Utilities Commission in Arizona. I think that's named differently than a lot of states. I'm interested in kind of what factors go into your decisions to seek an office, to seek higher office. What goes into your thinking about that?
Great. So I would reflect back on my cancer journey in regards to what I learned during that journey. So before that, I was a person who would easily talk her way out of things, of saying, "Oh no, I don't have all the answers," or "No, I don't have enough time," out of a decision. But after cancer, my whole life took a new stance and a new purpose. Was like, okay, I almost died, not once, but twice, but what do I have to lose now? So that fear of the unknown, the fear of failure kind of went out the window, and was like, okay, well, I'm going to try. And if I don't get it, I bet I'm going to learn along the way, just things that I could use to make me a better person. So I took that when I took a little break from the state capitol. I had a family member that was ill with cancer, and I committed myself to helping her go through her journey as she helped me with mine. So for me, it was a easy decision, where others thought, wow, you're leaving as being the minority leader of the Democratic Party at the state Senate. And I was like, no, my family comes first. And, positions will be here for me at any time. If I wanted to come back to serve, they're always going to be there, where my family member may not. So I went through that journey, and thankfully she came out great and is doing great today as well too. And so I was talking to her, and she was saying, well, what do you want to do now? And I was like, I'm not ready to go back to the state. I really want to focus on my community because I don't see it progressing as it once was. And so that just brought that thought back into my mind of saying, okay, am I going to just sit here and complain, or I'm going to go and do something about it? So that's when I decided, okay, I'm going to go do something about it and run for mayor. And took on that, very seriously and committed myself to winning and tried my hardest. And thankfully, the voters selected me to be their first female mayor. And it's truly been an honor to represent them. But it goes back to, taking that risk because, yes, you may fail or you may win, but you're going to learn along the way of things about you and things how to make you a better person. And I could have stayed as mayor, for a very long time. We don't have term limits. And so I could have continued. But the issue of the environment and serving on the Corporation Commission, to me, it hits near and dear to my heart with my cancer and wanting to move our state forward in a trajectory of more renewable energy, being the voice for Arizonans, and restoring trust and accountability back to the commission. So again, I was confronted with, I'm going to just complain or am I going to do something? And so at that point, I was like, I'm going to run for state office and I'm going to give it a try. Win or lose, I'm going to try my hardest and hope that all Arizonans know that I'm going to be there to represent them at their time of need. So here in Arizona, the Corporation Commission covers quite a bit beyond utilities. It affects, everyday Arizonans every single day, whether they're flipping a switch, flushing a toilet, pumping gas into their car, cooking with gas, figuring out, how we move forward on renewable energy, our power lines, our railroads, when you establish a small business, if you invest in stocks and bonds, that is all covered within our Corporation Commission here in the state of Arizona. So I like to call it's probably the most powerful entity that's written into our state constitution as a separate entity of government, where it affects people every single day, but they know very little about the power that commission holds.
I love it. And I'm going to brag on you for a minute. I know that your primary was earlier this month and you were the top vote getter in the primary. So good for you and congratulations on that. And we'll, of course, be watching that race very closely as you head into November. And while we're on politics, I guess it's we are taping this episode on the heels of the Democratic convention and as the Republican convention got underway here last night. So it would be remiss of me not to ask you about the swing state in which you sit. Your state has voted Republican actually in every presidential election since 1972, I think with the exception of Bill Clinton's reelect in 96. But it seems like the margin's getting closer and closer each year. And in fact, now you're looking at probably what's the most watched Senate race with Mark Kelly, Democrat Mark Kelly taking on Martha McSally. You've got Jeff Flake leading a group of Arizona former and current electeds, I believe, Republicans endorsing Joe Biden this week. And at least according to 538, Biden is up in Arizona right now, 48-44. So I think my question to you, Anna, is, what's going on in Arizona with these shifts? And is this really the year that Democrats might go blue at the presidential level?
Absolutely. I feel that this is the year that Arizona will be blue and will take Joe Biden and make him president. We've been waiting for it for a very long time here in Arizona in regards to that representation that we need at a president and vice president. I would say you're correct in regards to, Jeff Flake and him supporting other Republicans that are supporting and voting for Joe Biden as well, too. And having served in the state legislature at a time, the most tumultuous times in our history, where we were given a black eye for everything that we were doing wrong, from SB 1070 to being just discriminatory of who you love and who you want to marry, or in regards to your status as a dreamer. Those were all things that really tarnished the image of Arizona. where you had, at one time Senator McCain leading on an immigration issue. And then now you have other Republicans that are stepping up and saying enough is enough. I served when we had a very strong Tea Party and we were the super minority. And those were difficult days where all these very hateful and hurtful legislation came through. And I know that, being a native Arizonan, that Arizona is so much more better than that. And I'm just proud to see that now people are wanting to use their voice at the voter's box to elect someone that represents their values and their priorities. So we are definitely not taking anything for granted. We love that we are a swing state. We've been hoping for this for many, many years and many election cycles, but the time has come now, and we just need to show that action at the ballot box so that Arizona will turn blue this year.
I love it. Hear, hear. Let me ask you a final question. As you know, this podcast is really about an honorable profession. We've talked a lot about public service and its impact. But I kind of want to end with another public service question for you. What do you talked a lot about what you've done, so we may, you can draw on some of that. But what do you think the most rewarding part of your years of public service have been? Particularly, governing through so many tough times, like you've talked about in the legislature with some of those really hateful initiatives that were going on with COVID. What is it about public service that gives you strength and that you'd like people to know about the profession?
I would say I love public service. I think that's a part of who I am, and how I was raised is to give back and just receive so many benefits from it. And they weren't monetary benefits, but they were more benefits of friendship, of solutions that were solved for people who had needed that voice, for me to be their voice and for me to bring that solution to them, to their community, to represent their needs and issues. And for me, I'm blessed with those that have told me, you've changed my life because of what you did. And, you were really there because you wanted to help your community. You weren't there just because you wanted to fill a space or have, this ego or accolades. It was, you were there for a purpose. And I think that goes back to when I was a young girl at the store, where my uncle would tell me, we're here to help others right now. And you never do something for someone expecting anything in return. You do it because it's the right thing to do. And he would tell us that, I would say, once, every 2 weeks, because we would encounter something at the store that would go back to that value of you do something because it's the right thing to do, not because you expect anything in return. But I would say here in public service, I've received so much, just being humbled and being blessed to be that voice for my community when they needed it the most. And I would say that's a true blessing. And that's what I look back at of being able to reflect, of saying, I did leave, that position or my community better off than when it started. And actually for me, that to me is the true blessing of public service.
Well, Anna Tovar, I want to thank you so much for joining me. I absolutely adore you, which you know. I'm leaving here so inspired by you, to be honest. And, I just really appreciate you sharing your heart and your strength and your story. It's a remarkable story, and it's just such a reminder of how important public service is. So thank you. Thanks for your leadership in these extraordinary times. And we will be watching with great interest as you continue to do great things in Tolleson and in the state of Arizona. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on.
Thanks for listening to An Honorable Profession. Please subscribe to hear more amazing leaders. And keep asking your elected officials to be honorable. Boots Road Group produces podcasts. I'm Ryan Coonerty, and because we keep things honorable, no tax dollars were used in the making of this podcast.